Hello everyone and welcome to the Annihilation Nexus Natters live stream with myself Murg and with my network co-lead and manager of the Questions Galore, Navar. Say hello.
Hello everyone.
So today I'm going to be taking you all through some topics which are dear to my heart in Annihilation and covering them. So the main one is going to be the balancing of mobility classes in Annie, especially the newly buffed Dasher, and also the Scout and Acrobat classes. And then we'll also be talking about increasing teamwork in Annihilation, along with an ending conversation on how to improve the Spider class. So, without further ado, balancing the classes of mobility. Traditional game design from from Team Fortress 2 or from Overwatch usually balances mobility classes by having them have a reduced health pool. And this is kind of the approach I'm going to be taking towards all three of the mobility classes in the future of Annihilation. And I want to go over the reasons why I think this is the best approach rather than tweaking any of the abilities directly. So for those of you who are active on our Discord, you may have seen a few days ago that I linked a couple of videos, or a video, about trickle-down balance. And now this is all about a community member in Team Fortress 2 looking at how the development team for TF2 balances their game around the highest level skills of play. The idea being that the highest skill players are the ones that are going to have the most impact on your game mode, and obviously if you have a very underbalanced mechanic, they are going to well, he says abuse it, but I would say take advantage of it and press home that advantage. And the problem with that is that a meta of a game mode can become very stale. We see that a little bit with Overwatch. If anybody follows it, the GOATS composition is very powerful. 3 tanks, 3 supports. And that's been part of their meta for a while. And they're doing a lot of changes to the game mode to try and affect that upper level of play. And it's something that I am trying to also look at for Annihilation. So there's a trickle-down balance video, which I'll try and link again at the end of the stream or at some point. But I want to go over how I look at evaluating the power of the mobility class. So there are 2 factors that I always consider when considering the power, and that's the availability, so that's the cooldown amongst other restrictions, and the potency, which is how strong is the active. That one could be a bit more subjective to define, apparently, but it can be quite objective. So potency of an ability, if we go say Blood Mage, if with this ability, if you basically hit anybody with this at the moment, it would reduce 2 hearts. But so you could have the argument of how balanced this is. But if we made it so this ability more or less insta killed you, that would be considered very powerful objectively and would be overpowered. So, but it's not just that scenario for mobility classes that you have to consider it in, because obviously Blood Mage, you have to get real up close and personal, and there's the effect, that's the area of effect there. So it's obviously used in groups. But when we look at the mobility classes like Scout, for example, you've obviously got the coastal maps, so you've got a bit of flat terrain with your horizontal grappling, so there's a lot of horizontal speed that you can get. But also on maps like this, you can get a lot of vertical mobility, which allows the class to, if you're a professional player, you would obviously not have that trouble, but there we go. So you've got a lot of vertical mobility as well, and obviously with the fall damage as well. Now, mobility classes in any game have the ability to pick and choose their fights, which is very, very crucial for players who want to try and make those sort of higher level impacts on gameplay. So if you're wanting to harass and chase down low health opponents who are maybe higher geared than you, the speed buff as well that you get, especially as a leather scout, allows you to be a bit more agile, and it also allows you a great combat bonus in PvP. which can be very potent as well. But there's other things to consider as well. So obviously, at the moment, Scout's grapple is affected underwater. You can't use it. You can use it in shallowish water, or if you grapple to land like that. But you also have the other counters to it, which we've added in the past, such as if you're on fire, you cannot grapple, and if you have slowness, you cannot grapple. And so those are kind of the limiting factors of Scout. Now, same with Dasher. Before this update, Dasher used to have, a very hard penalty for its active use. You'd be able to teleport instantly. Yeah, sure, within 25 blocks sounds quite good, but you would have not only a hunger debuff, but you'd also have your timer debuff on the active, and you would also have 2 negative potion effects. And I felt that was too harsh for Dasher. The availability of the active and the potency weren't quite in balance with the other 3 classes. We'll take the best, the almost a middle child here now, which is Acrobat. Hasn't been touched for a long time. 10-second cooldown, fall damage immunity, and a nice little double jump. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to rank each of these mobility classes in terms of their power based on the availability and potency. So let's start with Scout. So Scout has a grapple, which allows vertical and horizontal mobility with ease. It can also be used in now this is one aspect that I want to really ram home, is that it can be used within the World Guard region. Dasher cannot be, Acrobat can be, obviously, but Scout, this kind of mobility, what I just did there, would be similar to a Dasher being going to go up, but this can be done within enemy land. Dasher can't do this. So that there's the horizontal, the vertical mobility sort of comparison there. So if I go, because I'm on red team here, if I go Dasher, I cannot get up there at all. So that's obviously a major power play for Scout. So that's the potency part of it, as well as the availability, because that's a strong part of the kit. The availability of Scout as well, 2.5 seconds for the ability on cooldown, which is quite a low cooldown considering how much distance you can get. So if we do a bit of an experiment here, if I'm on this bit of the tent and I grapple, if I jump and I pull, I can pretty much get out in one pull. If we did something similar for Dasher, however, the comparable would be, if I can go up there, so let's just wait the 8 seconds here. So I'm not even going to be able to probably teleport as far as I got with Scout, and that's even it being increased. So yep, I can't quite get there. So the furthest I'm going to get is to there, and then straight out. So comparable maybe on the horizontal, but again, I have 10 seconds until I can blink again, and I have to, but with Scout it would be only 2.5 seconds, plus as your Leather Scout you still get that speed 1 buff. So that's kind of how we're looking at, or sorry, I'm looking at the power level between Scout and Dasher. Obviously Dasher is very much just point and click, so if you want to get straight up there to that tree, boom, you're there and you can go. With Scout, for a comparison, its vertical mobility isn't so quick, it's not as instant, but cast time 1 elephant, 2 elephant, 3 up, so you're maybe 4 seconds behind. So you could argue then, by the time that the Dasher is caught up with its 10-second cooldown, it's only on 5. So in terms of vertical mobility, I would argue that Dasher is a superior class because of its instant ability to teleport. Obviously there's a bit of travel time with the Scout grapple going up, but with horizontal mobility, Scout is king. Acrobat, like I say, I believe to be the kind of almost middle child in the two now. It has a good repertoire because it has that immediate automatic fall damage immunity. It didn't used to be that way back in the day. It used to be so many seconds after you double jumped, you'd have fall damage immunity, but that was frustrating to play against. Well, it's frustrating to use actually, rather, because there was no feedback to the player when you were immune. You had to sort of time it. You didn't quite know how far you were falling, and other things like that, which were frustrating to make the kit usable. So permanent fall damage immunity. Travel time upwards, bit lower than Scout because you've not got any cast. It's just straight and go. But you also have issues with its potency because it's quite low potent. Its velocity is much lower. That being said, it is maybe a bit more easy to use. So for example here, if I want to get over to that tree there, I just go jump once and twice, and if I'd timed that a bit better, I'd have got all the way across. To do a comparison to Scout, however, if I just fly over here again, I go Scout to try and bridge this gap here would be a bit more tricky, because if I want to get up to that tree ledge, I've got to go sort of here and then jump down a little bit maybe, then pull, but then I'll get knocked, and we'd still get a bit of fall damage here, even with our fall damage reduction. So I almost kind of see Dasher being the king of vertical mobility and Scout being the king of horizontal mobility. Now, on most maps, that will be the main advantage. It will be whoever has the greatest horizontal mobility will be able to pick and choose their fights and, dominate in that respect. And the main thing for me with Scout's power is that availability of the grapple, 2.5 second cooldown, which is very potent, and that's why in the last couple of updates we've looked at trying to add counterplay to Scout. How, so for example fire, and obviously our player base is adapted to that by, every Scout player, at least the very high ones that I see, always carry a water bucket, so it can be very tricky to slow them. Speaking of slowing them, the slowness effect can't be removed, obviously, unless you have a milk bucket. But the slowness effect is very rarely used on the Bard box. Usually you're doing regeneration or speed for your team. There's not a lot of other classes that can do a slowness effect. So though we've given the slowness debuff as an option, it's not being actively taken up by the community. And I think the reason for that is, like I said, there's not a lot of availability of the slowness effect versus fire, and that's something we maybe need to look at as well. So for example, if we wanted another class to apply slowness, not just Bard, we could do that. You obviously have Iceman. If you hit an Iceman, you get a bit of slowness, but it's not quite a bit of time for a Scout. You do have splash slowness potions, but again, those are rarely made, rarely seen, because a lot of players like to prefer the offensive buffs. So, with regards to the sort of counterplay we're offering with Scout, it's very limited. So, with that in mind, we need to focus on what makes Annihilation fun, what makes, Annie fun to play. And often it is these very powerful abilities. And that's why I'm reluctant to add any further nerfs directly to Scout in terms of its abilities, because I must admit I also enjoy Scout. For everybody who doubts that I'm just I completely hate Scout, I should just delete the class. No, that right there is fun. That is great feeling. That great horizontal mobility, chasing down your opponents. It is great fun. But with such the power of the class, again, that potency with that horizontal movement, every 2.5 seconds I can cast as 1, 2, and then 1, 2 again. That is nothing. Dash could not keep up with that. Neither could Acrobat. Not any class could really deal with that. And that can be a problem, because Scout then becomes very much a one-trick wonder. It's always useful in every scenario. So trying to keep the class fun, fair, and balanced can be tricky. And I understand people's frustration that if we keep just adding counterplay to Scout, in the end it's going to be basically every class, any class you pick will have some massive counter to Scouts active, which isn't, fun for Scout players. And we need a better solution to this. And this is why I think that us in the next update, we will be considering reducing the maximum amount of health on Scout and Dasher, and maybe even Acrobat. This is done in Team Fortress 2 as well as Overwatch. The best examples are Scout in TF2 and Tracer in Overwatch. They both have reduced health pools, but their mobility is huge. And the reason I think looking at reducing the maximum number of hearts on Scout is a good way is because it addresses a number of key issues about the Scout kit, whilst maintaining a skill ceiling which players can aspire to go at, and it doesn't make the counters cheap. So what do I mean by that? So a lot of the community suggestions which we have seen in the forums have been ones that suggest make it that the grapple gets detached, or you can't use the grapple if you're in combat. But if you think about most of Minecraft PvP, you don't often get a chance to not be hit, especially when you're in melee combat. The chances of you being hit, even as a skilled player, are pretty high. And for one small hit to be able to disable your active for, any length of time is going to be frustrating to play against, especially when we don't do that for such as Acrobat or Dasher. So that would be frustrating to play against. We do have Fire, obviously as a sort of counter already in the combat, but there is counterplay to that. You use a water bucket. So that is what I like, there's a bit of counterplay to the countering of your own class. So with reducing the health pool, what we're doing here is you're saying essentially to a player, look, you're a scout, you've got your speed 1 in leather, and you've got this very powerful, ability to be able to either chase up to your target and engage in a fight. And if you want to take that fight, though, you have to be confident you can win it. You are a scout. You are a hard, a bit of a glass house here. You can, really hit them hard. But if you get hit yourself, you're going to be a lot more squishy. You're going to be able to take less hits. But keeping the active on such a short cooldown and keeping the potency keeps the class fun. But it means that the scout class needs more skill to play with. And that's something I want to encourage. I think that every class should have an ease of use to pick up, but it should take skill, time, and dedication to the mode or to the class to get good at it, essentially, and to master it. And having a reduced health pool means that you are still able to engage in these fights, still keep this very powerful and fun active and fun ability, but if you want to use it, you've got to be careful how you pick your battles. So that's why I think it's the best compromise at the moment. Now, to be fair and to be clear, this is just an idea. And with most ideas for Annihilation, it can be difficult to figure out what is actually effective until we've put it live. We can certainly get community feedback on the forums and from sandbox games where we test things. But overall, for a game like Annie, it's difficult to figure out how the change will actually affect the meta of the mode until it goes live. And we can always look at reverting or amending any update, buff, nerf, etc. to any class. Just because Dashers and we've removed the food penalty for use of the active and we've removed all negative effects, doesn't mean that we might not roll that back if we don't feel that is balanced or fair. But this is something that I feel that needs to go live for a chance for us to have a go and say, right, we tried that, didn't quite work. Do we need to be less harsh, more harsh, or look at a different solution to Scout and other mobility classes? So, based on that, we need to rate the power of each class. Excuse me.
Microphone muted. Microphone activated.
Need to rate the power of each class and look at how many hearts we would reduce it by. So for me, Scout is the most powerful of the trio of 3 classes. And before anybody trolls me in the comments, Spider is not a mobility class. Yet. we'll get to that. It's not. I'm looking at the 3 main mobilities. So that's Scout, Dasher, and Acrobat. So for me, Scout is the king of horizontal mobility. It is just unparalleled. This is quite a powerful active like that. Only 2.5 seconds. No other class can keep up with this. It's just, that is just fact. So it has power. It seconds Dasher in terms of vertical mobility, but just that there. Even though I had a cast time, I was moving quite further forward. Could have that caught a Dasher? These are all the different kind of scenarios that we need to look at. So yeah. Oh yes, apologies for the cough. I forgot. TeamSpeak muting does not mute the stream mute. Thank you, Instant, for reminding me. Apologies to all for the horrendous cough. So, as I was saying, Scout, I believe, is the most powerful of the three classes. And if we were trying to place them on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say Scout, as an overall, on vertical and horizontal mobility, is around an 8, given on its pure mobility. When you factor in other restrictions or lack of, such as the ability can be used anywhere within the World Guard region, along with the low cast time of the low cooldown, that would buff it in my mind to about a 9. Then you obviously have the counter plays, which would bring it back down to about an 8 for me. So for Scout, this is just my subjective sort of workings here. A Scout class would be about a power 8. For Dasher, king of vertical mobility, absolutely. Longer active cooldown though, and it doesn't have its negative effects anymore, but neither does Scout, so I'm not going to consider that. The ability to do 25 blocks in any direction, quite powerful, especially it's an instant cast. So for vertical, no risk of me taking fall damage here once I go up. With Scout, obviously I might get a bit of fall damage as I come down, depending on the difference in height. But with horizontal mobility, it's still powerful, but it's not as powerful as Scout. And like I say, that long cooldown time adjusted with the fact that this cannot be used within the World Guard region. So again, the perfect example that I showed earlier was that Scout would be able to get up there on top of this tower. Me as an enemy Dasher, no, I can't do that. And is that a fair balance? Because it's an instant teleport, maybe not. But then again, if Scout can get up there, why shouldn't Dasher be able to? So in that respect, I would say the power of Dasher is knocked down to about a 5 for me. It's still quite powerful, but it just doesn't have that availability aspect. And then we get on to the favourite child, Acrobat. And, it, in comparison to both those classes, is fairly weak in terms of horizontal and vertical mobility. But what it lacks up for in that respect is what I would say is a fairly easy active to use in terms of, you don't have to cast a rod, or you don't have to sneak and look and make sure you're within 25 blocks. Nope, it's just, oh, you want to go there? Sure, just double jump it. And permanent no fall means that you can survive, just not on coastal, for example, but for other maps, severe drops, or if you're, getting assaulted on the high ground, you can just double jump away. The fact it also spawns with a bow brings its power up a little bit, but in terms of its mobility, and also the lack of restrictions in the World Guard region, help bring the score up for me to about a 4 for Acrobat overall. So cooldown is similar to Dasher, so if you think about it that way, in terms of availability. But in potency terms, it's a lot lower, but then in ease of use of the active, So for me, that's how I'm scoring it. So Scout is 8, Dasher's a 5, and Acrobat's maybe about a 4, maybe even less, maybe a 3 for Acrobat. So with respects to that, we would then be looking, I would be then looking at scaling their maximum hearts respectively. So for Acrobat, at this point, I think I would leave Acrobat unchanged as a mobility class in terms of health. I think it's fairly well balanced. That's evident by the fact we haven't touched it in such a long time. If we were to do maybe any reduction in its health, it would maybe only be half a heart. So let's say Acrobat would go down to 9.5 hearts. Dasher, what about Dasher? Quite powerful since the new update, and I think that we need to wait a little longer to see how much, players really begin to use the class with its potency. I must admit, I got absolutely dropped on by a Dasher earlier today in a Hamlet match, and that was great to see. Frustrating, again, to die after 30 minutes of grinding to get my bow not unbreaking 3, but, it was good to see the diversity of the classes being used in Annie. But Scout so for Dasher, if we were going to do any heart reductions, maybe 1, maybe I think 1 is probably fair for now. For Scout, however, I think that a reduction of 2 hearts would be a fair compromise, based again on the sheer power of that class. Obviously you don't want to make it too squishy, but at the same time, there needs to be an understanding that if we begin talking about reducing the maximum number of hearts, if the hearts want to go back up on a class, then we need to reduce the power of an active. And it's trying to figure out what's best way to do it. Do you keep all classes at their 10 hearts, apart from Berserker, obviously, and reduce the actives, or do you buff other actives, or do you try a mix of combination of lower power abilities have more health, but higher impact abilities have less health? So that's my kind of thinking for the next update with respects to those 3 classes, and I suspect there's 1,001 questions. So Navarre,
It's really hard to pull questions out of this because you're doing such a great job monologuing, and everyone's trying to they're either having like sub conversations at the same time or etc. One of the ones I just picked up right now was that there was a concern that mobility classes don't stand a chance at all against combat classes if the HP is scaled this way.
I think, like I say, I think that is a concern that has been noted as well. But I think that you need to recognise that, Scout. A slight tangent here is when I suggested this change to some of our staff team earlier. One of the comments I got was, "Well, Scout would be useless in rushing. Now it would be completely useless." To which my immediate sort of counter argument would be, well, when was the last time you rushed as civilian, or when you last rushed as minor? There are obviously classes which are going to be stronger in different situations. Scout I see as just that. It is always a sort of a flanking class. It's taking its 1v1s because it can engage and disengage at will. And I think that any seasoned player, if you put up a skilled Scout player versus a skilled, warrior, for example, or a blood mage, it would be a pretty close call with that reduced health pool. Right now, I think it's very much in the Scout's favour, just because if the fight starts going south, the Scout can just immediately disengage, and they will still be able to do that. But with this reduced health pool, they've got they can only maybe get 1 or 2 hits in rather than maybe 3 or 4 on their opponent, and they can dash. They can scout away, regenerate, or they can just leave it and not have to worry about the consequence of engaging that fight. Most other classes, combat classes, if you're going blood mage versus blood mage, unless you have other potion effects or teammates around you, it really is just down to who has got the better aim. But with Scout, you do have almost a little bit of a cheese where you can just be like, oh lol, I'm losing this fight, I'm out. And I think that having reduced health means that you have to be a bit more careful about how you engage. It'll still be strong. If you find a straggler who's on low health, or if you want to be able to harry down an enemy who is not as good at PvP as you, Scout will still be that enabler class for you. But I think it just needs to happen, and we'll see how much it affects the range of classes that are used in a typical game.
All right. There was, sort of related to Scout having to play against its strengths. there was someone talking about how they don't like scouts traveling over to other teams really quickly and going ham on the poor miners. But that sounds like they just don't have a good defense in place, or is that something else?
The topic of mine rushing in Annihilation, this is a slight deviant here, but the topic of mine rushing in Annie has been one that's been discussed for a while, and was even almost sort of prevented with the release of Annie 2.0 way back in the day when Vacon and Adam were working on it. And for those of you who don't remember, it added a couple of changes where there was a death penalty, so upon death you'd have to wait 5 to 10 seconds to respawn, but in return it meant that you could keep your iron armor. Now, the problem was with that approach was that it undervalued the mine rushing strategy, and in Annihilation there are so many strategies, and that's what I think makes it fun to play. You know, it's not just the team who controls mid wins. No, if a team is well coordinated enough in phase 2, then they can, knock another team out. And there, that's what the addition of the Wither and then the Golems returning, yay, opened up another side objective to draw attention away from mid. So there's a lot of things that you can do in Annihilation to vary the outcome of a game, and adding more objectives and more strategy is what's key. Yeah, Scout being able to get over and harass the miners, yeah, that is annoying. But remember though, Riftwalker is actually now quicker. If you rift as soon as the game starts, grab a teleport, you're straight in the enemy base. One of the rift points is even here, and on the other side, I believe the rift point is around here. So being able to rift in 10 seconds, I don't think a Scout could, not with the new underwater grapple restrictions anymore. But yeah, as a team, you've got to be able to, secure your mines, put some teleports up, barricade, get some archers. But yeah, it's part of the reasoning for trying to balance mobility classes, but not the core reasoning. Any other interesting?
I don't think there were that were on topic. People have been posting questions about various approaches they'd like you to take to other things. There's one idea here that I wrote down that I particularly like before we get into questions about maybe PvP classes, which is, so someone mentioned it would be really nice if you could prestige your classes in some way, shape, or form.
That's an interesting one, and it has been covered before on the forums. The problem with... So the problem is that obviously you want to be able to allow new players just to hop into the game and have the same level of gear and their kits as everybody else, because otherwise you make a very strong power play that experienced players are just going to steamroll new players, and that's no fun. Being able to change or slightly tweak, similar to TF2, what your spawn kit is, we could maybe look at, like, for example, maybe Acrobat could spawn with a stone sword, but it doesn't get its bow and arrow. Or Archer, instead of a punch bow, gets a power 1 bow, but it only starts with less arrows, and its arrow resource drop is a longer cooldown, and there's less arrows from the drop. That kind of thing I'm interested in. But it's not currently sort of on the forefront of what we want to do. I'm more interested in trying to make the entire roster of classes balanced and useful, and then we could begin maybe I suppose it almost would be subclassing, if that's what you mean by prestiging, or have I gone off on a completely wrong tangent?
Sorry, I was dealing with some particular toxicity in the Instagram stream. But prestiging in general is where a class gets, like, you reset your... I don't know how it would work in Annihilation, because I know prestige is like, you get a certain, like, you increase levels, and then you reset them all, but your classes stay the same power, you can continue powering them up. In a PvP game like Annihilation, I don't know how that could possibly work.
A bit more clarity on that question, maybe, but... So, if anybody has any further comments or questions about that approach to mobility classes, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we shall move on to the next topic, which is increasing or encouraging and increasing teamwork in Annie.
All the other questions seem to be about buffing or otherwise modifying PvP classes.
Okie doke, that's something we can maybe discuss at the end of the spider discussion. So, teamwork. In Annihilation, obviously back way before the game went out of its alpha or beta state, it used to be that this little device here, the Ender Furnace, didn't exist. And when the game would start, everybody would go rush to their mines, grab their Fernite, and then, hide their furnaces to smelt because a teammate or an unkillable enemy would come along and nick your gear. Not very teammatey-ish. And this is a problem still to this day. If you are if I'm on my red team and I'm mining gold, if I then, you don't see anybody place, even in this bit, 4 furnaces just here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and smelt, because chances are teammates going to come over and go, woo, what's in this furnace? Yoink. And that's poor gameplay design, because, yeah, sure, that's against the rules, you can report them, get them banned and all that, but that's still disabling you as a team member from playing as a team. And I think what I would like to do is to look at enabling further teamwork. And now, to be clear, enabling teamwork doesn't mean that you are sharing your resources. It can actually be the other way. It can be enabling you as a solo player or a player with a set objective within the game, like make invisibility potions and rush or harass the enemy, to be able to do so from almost your own little base without having to worry that a teammate is nicking your hard-earned supplies that you have made for your play. So with that in mind, this was something that we introduced in Annihilation, I think a year or so ago, and it was the private brewing stand in the shop. So, because when I took over the lead of Annie, my first one was, right, I'm sick and tired of trying to brew potions in peace. Why do I have to constantly be watching my back anywhere? Or why do I have to hide in my own base to brew potions for my invisibility or my strength rush or for my little group when some, muppet just comes along and goes, oh, hi, thanks for your potions, and then just walks off? That's frustrating. You're not being a team. They are not being a team member, and the game is actively discouraging me from being a team member because it's disabling teamwork. It's allowing people to essentially grief me, and that sucks. So when we were looking at adding the private brewing stand, obviously there was considerations to be made that if players could get 100 of these, they would spam them everywhere, and they wouldn't be breakable by teammates, and they would be griefable by placing on top of ladder defenses, and those were all very valid concerns. But what we found actually was that rarely happened, to the point now where we've almost entirely lifted the private brewing stand restriction. So it means that now in the late game, if you want to brew, in the safety of your own, imagine a nice big defensive wall here in Coastal, you can do that. If the wall's built on the second bit, you can place your brewing stand here in peace, and your teammates now accept that they can't interact with your stand, and that's just a fact now. Before, though, you would never have done that. And has that taken away from the game? No, because that's your objective. That's you doing what you want for the betterment of your team. You are brewing strength and speed and regeneration and what other potions you need for your group, or maybe you're making splash so your entire team can rush. So the private brewing stand met quite a bit of resistance back in the day implementation, but I pushed it through, and I think it's done wonders for teamwork. So with that in mind, I want to discuss about private furnaces and private chests. So we'll do the easy one first, which is furnaces. Now, obviously, there's quite a bit of difference between a brewing stand, which costs 10 gold in terms of availability, and making a furnace, which can be obtained via the miner kit, and can be easily obtained with 8 cobblestone. So basically any map. So the availability to grief with these kind of items is much higher. However, again, we can look at placing restrictions initially on this, which would which would mean that you're not as likely to be able to team grief. So, for example, we can stipulate that you must be X blocks away from your Nexus, that you cannot place it within X blocks of a resource. So, for example, I couldn't just go miner and just be like, oh, hi team, yeah, good luck getting that coal ore, and I'm just going to place 4 more around it. We could restrict that so it's not possible to place it within maybe 1, 2, 3 blocks. So, you're constantly forced out. Hang on, yeah. Otherwise that thing is going to bug me. Sorry, Green. So, the reason again for this is very similar to the private brewing stand. If you are smelting your gold because you're doing invis rushing to help your team in the long run, then why shouldn't you be able to do that in private? Now, there's obviously got to have to be a limit to maybe how many of these you can place and where you can place them. And also, there's obviously the argument that actually some players like making public furnaces, where they will set up a wall of furnaces, they will just go miner all game, and they'll just keep supplying the team. So we've obviously got to make a way to differentiate between a public and a private furnace, and where you can place them, and how many you can place. So at the moment, it's still in a bit of a discussion phase, but my initial gut feeling would be that you would be able to place up to 8 private furnaces. And that would enable you to be able to speed smelt in private, so get your equipment ready to go, probably your gold initially. And this will lead on into the private chest concern. So I'll hang fire on the whole hoarding aspect until then. But essentially what we could do is also limit it that only raw material items such as ores along with fuel can be placed in the slots. So for example, these won't become like chests then. These would become, you can only place coal or wood, you can only place gold or iron ore in here. So you couldn't place, like a boss buff or a sword, as a sort of another secret chest. Now, touching on what was raised earlier with the Heil, what we were raising about earlier with mine rushing is that at the moment the Ender Furnace is completely private storage. It's safe from your teammates, but it's also safe from your enemies. And to me, that almost removes a bit of a looting aspect to the game, which you get from mine rushing and obviously, sort of attacking enemy resources. If I am about to get rushed and, I don't want to lose this lovely stack of 64 diamonds, I'll just quickly, hop in here, and yoink, they're safe. Nobody can touch this. Nobody. Is that fair? Is that fair to me against my teammates? Absolutely. No problem, no doubt. Is that fair to the enemy team? I would argue not. Because I'm denying them the opportunity to loot, to scavenge me, essentially. And I think that needs to be another aspect and strategy in the game. That if you find somebody's base, you can steal a lot of their items. Now, for furnaces, obviously it's much harder to smelt in private in 1.9 and up because of the new ambient sounds that they add to furnaces when they're cooking. But again, to be able to protect it from your teammates, sure, but enabling enemies to be able to break these private furnaces would be a good thing. So for me, I think that's how we do it. How we differentiate between what's a private furnace and what's a public furnace, I don't know yet. Still got to try and figure that one out. If anybody has any ideas on that, feel free to let me know. Funnily enough, this is actually a topic that I actually posted on the forums a few years back, actually, or a long time ago. And similar concerns are brought up about the private brewing stands, but we don't typically see that many players trying to grief. They just want to have fun, and I think that this is a change that would be, beneficial. So that's the easy one. That's the easy discussion. Furnaces. Sure, let's put them in. What about chests? So this is where it gets a little bit more controversial, a little bit more, this could be a bit more impacting on teamwork and gameplay. So at the moment, most extra gear is dumped in community chests, like this one. It's available for everybody to take. However, at the moment, it is entirely possible for me to go, right, I just killed, a couple of yellow scrubs who tried to mine rush. I've got their iron gear. I'm already in iron, but I would like to have a backup kit in case I die. So what I'll do is, I'll just come over here, I'll just mine up this bit of stone, I'll place a chest, put a bit of dirt over it, and that's mine. So is that me resource hogging? Is that me taking away from my team? Or is that me just enabling myself for later to assist in teamwork? Because I can already do this. So I can already, place a chest down there, cover that up with dirt, that's a dirt block, and, and continue our way. So again, and the example I always give is if I'm invis rushing in the game, usually as a solo player, why should a teammate be able to come along and nick all of my, golden pickaxes, all of my invisibility potions that I'm storing in a chest? That's not fair. I'm being a team member by doing this for the team, but to enable a teammate to be able to grief me like that, it's just unfair. It sucks. So how do we make it fair in that respect, but then also acknowledge that there might be players who could grief this, where they would just go into a community chest and take everything out and then dump it in a private chest somewhere? My counter to that, though, is that could already theoretically happen in the game. The only difference with us adding private chests would be that no teammate would then be able to get those items back. But again, is that really what we're going to see? Again, a lot of fears that this could happen, but with similar to the private brewing stand, we didn't see a lot of instances where players were hoarding items, although I admit, chests, you can place any item, brewing stands, a bit of a different story. But again, it can happen already. But do we see that happen a lot? No, and I think the reason is because a lot of players in Annihilation, and in general, want to share. And I don't think adding a completely private chest just for them will increase hoarding any more than it currently happens. Now, there are, again, some limitations that we could put in place to try and prevent such hoarding. And those options include, at the moment, if I craft an item, so if I give myself some string, because I'm lazy, and some sticks, when I craft a bow, I will get a nice bow, but it will have my name in it, Murgatron's bow, because I crafted it. So what we could look at as a possible restriction, oops, sorry mouse, what we could look at as a possible restriction initially is that if you have a private chest, you can only place items that you have crafted. So that will kind of stop the hoarding potential aspect from people trying to grief a team by just taking items and going, nope, all of that is now mine. And we could also make it that only items from slain enemies that you have killed are able to be placed in your chest, so you get the loot from those drops. The last one might be a bit harder to do, but definitely items that only you have crafted is something that we already track, and it would be something that we could easily implement. Obviously, back in 1.7, the End of Furnace used to have 2 slots, and currently the End of Furnace only has 1 slot. If we added a private chest, we would remove the completely private, basically untouchable slot in the End of Furnace? And I think, again, the answer would be yes. Because what we are doing currently with the End of Furnace is we are denying the enemy team a chance to loot. And I think that that's unfair. We need to be able to say to players, look, if you want to go into an enemy quadrant and scope out, bases with loot, you can do so. And that is your reward. Whilst enabling team, players in a team of the same colour saying, look, You can place items in a chest and your teammate can't touch them because those are your items. And that's fair. That's fair to you, and if they want it, they can always ask. And maybe that would be a way to increase teamwork. Maybe not. But again, I think until we try the change, we won't know. But that is what I would like to see happen in the next update, is trying to reduce a flaw in our game design currently with Annie, which is we essentially enable team grief. And it's frustrating. But I think definitely adding private furnaces, yes. Private chests, there's a bit of work to do maybe about how we implement it, at least initially, with suitable restrictions to where it's not unfair or it's not making the idea of hoarding too appealing. So yeah, I suspect there's quite a few comments to go over on that topic.
I actually managed to pull more of them out this time. Since this entire topic started with teamwork, there were some concerns that telling people, I don't remember what exactly you were talking about, the limitations in the very beginning, but there were concerns that telling people what they could and couldn't do might not go very well.
What do you mean?
I don't remember.
Whoever asked that question, please state it again somewhere that Navarre can find it and get a bit more information on that concern, because it's need a bit more.
Following up, same person. There was talk about how encouraging clans and bringing in more clan support into Annihilation might be a good way to foster communication and teamwork.
So I think that is kind of a red herring with respects to public games. I think clans are always going to be coordinated, and they're always, as we saw in the the best example I always give of this, and I said it multiple times during the spring 2018 tournament, was that clans don't need that private access. They don't need those private chests. They don't need those private furnaces because they already are a team unit. And unfortunately, you're never going to get that in any public game. You're always going to have random players who maybe don't understand how the mode works or are just jerks. And this change is needed for the public games. For clan games, sure. And encouraging clans is something we definitely are going to look at as part of the next update. But we can talk about that a little bit later. But for encouraging clans as a replacement instead of doing this, no. We need this for public games. For the solos, for the duos, and for the small groups of players, rather than the big sort of 20, 30 man, and women clans, and other, oh god, I'm thinking myself, 30 player clans, there we go, player, non-binary, non-gender. Anyway, next question.
Would private furnaces or chests break on death?
That's an interesting question. I don't think they would. I don't see a reason for them to. Very much
You're not
like
concerned about someone stockpiling supplies and then every time they die they just re-get up their full, diamond or whatever set?
But that currently happens. I mean, not to be that guy, but back in the day, me and Sax would often mine rush and we would just keep the spoils. Simply because we were often deep in enemy territory, we would just make a base. We would hoard the gear, maybe phase 3 or 4, we'd actually get a chance to get back to our team with all of our loot. But at the time, all we were doing was denying enemy resources. So, a bit of a counter argument there, I suppose.
Okay. And so some of the people are responding to the way I phrased my response to your response to their question.
Oh god.
Isn't that sort of the purpose of private chests, is to be able to re-gear after death?
Yeah. That is the point. And that is one of the I know it's definitely frustrating. When you die, you sort of go especially if you, like me, you spent 30 minutes on Hamlet because you got mine rushed twice while I was trying to get 30 levels, you got knocked down to 1, you finally got your level 30, but it's an unbreaking 3 bow, and you just want to smash your face into the keyboard and go, for God's sake, random enchanting, I love you so much, why did I add it back? To then be slain at mid within 2 minutes by 2 dashers just absolutely flanking me. it was frustrating. And obviously at the moment you can, if you have, iron smelting in your ender furnace, that iron is safe, you can just nip back and get it. But if you have extra gear, you have to make a private chest if you want to save it for yourself, and the potential for a teammate to grief that is huge. And that sucks because, maybe you don't want to share that. Maybe you feel that you would be a better, contributor to the team if you were able to get your hands on gear. That might be selfish, but again, why should a teammate be able to, steal maybe your hard-earned work? But that's maybe something else we need to look at, is because there is one, to go on for the bit of a tangent, when a team dies, you see a huge increase in player in teamwork. So if your Nexus has been knocked out, doesn't matter who if they're an unranked novice 1 player, you'll give them a spare set of full diamond armor. And that camaraderie you often don't see at all when your team is alive. And I think the reason for that is that a lot of players are almost sort of distrusting of other players, or maybe players who aren't as used to the game mode, because maybe they think, well, if I give this inexperienced player diamond armor, they're likely just going to go and die to 5 irons on the enemy team. Then suddenly one of those irons has now got a full set of diamond armor. That's actually hurting the team. And that's a bit of a nasty way to think about it. So how else could we encourage teamwork and sharing of gear? And maybe that's voice chat, maybe that's trying to get maybe that's something that players need to do. They need to be a bit more camaraderie with newer players and say, hey, look, let's play together. I'll back you up. I'll play, I'll show you the ropes. How do we encourage that? I don't know. If anybody's got any ideas on that one, let us know. Did that answer the question?
I mean, there wasn't a question at that part. You just went on about something.
Oh yeah, well, off tangent. My bad.
I just wanted to bring this up. There were concerns regarding private chests about X-rayers having a field day with them. I'm sure you have some way to belay such concerns, right?
I mean, the only thing I would say is right now you can have private chests, and obviously, those could be X-rayed right now. The main implementation of the privacy chests is to allow you to have a stash that is not griefable by your team. As for X-ray, obviously, there will always be ways around prevention measures, but it's maybe something that our development team could have a look at and see if there's any way that we can try and make X-raying more difficult or harder for those who'd be cheating.
Cool. There was, I guess this is sort of a joke, but there was Team Player of the Month 20k XP reward.
How would you define the parameters? And all I can say is clans would abuse the living bleep out of it. As nice an idea as it would have to be, I don't know how we would implement that and try and even keep it fair. It'd be tricky. But it's a nice idea, but practicality of it, unless it was literally just an honorary title. But would players even be interested in that? Maybe they would.
How are you going to encourage the building of proper defenses? With buffs of mobility classes, building walls become a nuisance to the team rather than a dynamic advantage.
My God, that's a very good, well-worded question. I mean, I have a defense guide on the forums. I'll, feel free to share it with people. I'll get it translated into Japanese. Again,
but how to encourage it, not just how to tell people how to do it.
I suppose it's just, again, that sort of engaging players and sort of being a bit of camaraderie. But it can be difficult because there are different defensive styles, and one way which you may think is better, maybe is objectively, but maybe subjectively there's also a different way of doing it. That's a tricky one. I think that if somebody is dedicated to building a defense in one way, if you join a game, maybe start phase 2 and somebody's already built a wall, but you're not too impressed with the wall, try and engage with them. Maybe try and explain to them and show them. Otherwise, if they're not heeding you and you wanted to do defense this game, then consider other defensive aspects. You could, be the spy who is hiding down the Nexus with, stronger potions, or in the mobilizer, or you could always just be helping your team in another defensive manner, maybe at mid with Bard. There are other ways you can play. That's a difficult one, and I don't know if I can fully give an actual answer, really. Sorry.
Yeah, the same user goes on, or the same player goes on about, different ways that walls and stuff aren't really working right now. Other than the builders delaying blocks, nothing else encourages it. Dasher climbs up walls in seconds, regardless of your structure. Scout just scouts up. Assassin leaps to the side. Acrobat can leap forward. Nothing really stops those aspects. So how do you stop all of that? Walls become limited or recently just block your vision.
I think it depends on how you build the wall. Obviously, this is obviously a bit of a side tangent, but there are different ways you can build it. You can put your void walls on. You can build your walls high enough. You can, I'm a great advocate of water, so spam that stuff. But a defense is never going to be 100%. Especially on maps like Coastal, it's never going to be 100% effective. There are always going to be ways around it. But it's meant to be a hindrance to an enemy team, to force them to spend time and resources to, get around it. So whether or not that's tunneling or that's them, as a prolonged siege, and that's maybe buying your team time to maybe quickly, if you're defending as red against yellow, and you are the last two teams, if you've got most of the yellow team tied up in your defenses around, quickly go Riftwalker, rift over to yellow, and quickly go stab them in the back whilst they've got no defenders. There's a lot of counterplay. Obviously, encouraging that in a public game can be difficult, but defenses are never going to be the end all, unless there are certain maps, and there's certain maps where building defenses is very difficult, and it relies more on teamwork and coordination to defend choke points or approaches to the Nexus, such as Amazon.
The same person has just posted into chat that Annihilation was always about building your own fortress, and it's missing that core essence now. Unless clans decide to build a base, you rarely see it happen, and they would like to see that utilized more.
I definitely like building defenses, but then again, that's just me. Encouraging building, I do have an idea for how that would progress, but it would require some development work on it. But I've got an idea how to maybe allow building to be a bit more easier, allow it to be more accessible, and just more fun to play with. But that's all I'll say on that front for now.
Okay. We did have some follow-up on Prestige. One of the examples they give is that you could, I don't know what you'd lose when you Prestige, but Archer could have an added plus 30% chance of blinding the enemy for a second or something. And really their goal with any sort of Prestige method would be to increase replayability, so that the stuff you like doesn't get stale.
I think instead of saying prestiging, it would be more subclassing there.
Yeah, that sounds more right. Maybe I think other games have like sockets or something where you can power up your classes and stuff with various other things, and you swap them out for various other features. I'm worried about how difficult that becomes to balance, though.
I would say a nightmare, honestly, for Annie. Even doing subclasses, you'd have to, opens up another whole realm of balancing. And like I say, my focus at the moment is getting the main roster fairly balanced, and then we can begin looking at subclasses. But I understand the whole concern about trying to keep replayability of Annie enjoyable, because it is quite an old mold, and some aspects of it can be a bit samey after a while.
Okay, just a time check to let you know we're going on about an hour now.
So I think we will move on to the last topic, which is Spider! I personally love this mechanic, which is throwing cobwebs. I think it's quite fun. I love the feel of it. But even from there, as a fun throw, look, that's how ineffective it is, really, as a class. The active of cobwebs just isn't that great. And what isn't great about it, the placement of cobwebs, because look, half of them are landed up here. The fact that I can just sort of run through my own thing, in a fairly, I would call that quite a thin choke. But, again, if I'm going to try again here, if an enemy's running and I feel I can try and snare them, how, do I throw them? How is it aim effect? I mean, what is going on here? That is obviously not very useful as a class active. So how do we make Spider a more effective class to use? Because my vision of Spider when we first implemented it was that it would be this fantastic rushing class where if you were going to attack mid, if you were attacking a mid base, you would, let's imagine there's a whole corridor here of blocks. You would, be throwing your cobwebs into the enemy base, trapping them all, and then your team would rush in and get them in whilst they're tangled in the web. But half the time your webs aren't going exactly where you want them to. And that's something I feel that we can address. So, first of all, it's one cobweb per throw. And the way they try to land is they are meant to try and spread out horizontally, so they don't stack vertically. But there are some issues with, obviously, if they get caught mid-air, then they can begin to stack further along like that, because they do try and stick together. So one idea I have at the moment is that instead of when the cobweb lands, it just lands like one, like this. It would instead form a kind of pyramid. So it would initially land here, but then it would also spawn a cobweb on top, to the left, to the right, back and side. Now immediately that is going to make a hell of a difference whenever you're trying to place down almost kind of like a slow field or a sticky web to catch players in. So if you can imagine, let's throw 3 of these down. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. But if you suddenly begin throwing, these sort of modified versions down, that's 2. Already a much greater surface area, much more difficult to overcome. You could still quickly jump over it, but then if you have one behind, so again, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, that's getting difficult. And if again, if we go over here, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, that's daunting to get through, and that can make Spider a lot more powerful to play with. So I think that is what we will try and do with Spider in the next update, is look at adding this kind of mechanic where the web's spread out a lot more. Obviously, we wouldn't probably give you 15 of these to play with. That might be a little too much, but we would try and find a balance between what's fun, but also not just aggravating. The other thing is the other active ability, which is the web. Well, I suppose it's more of a passive if you enable it, but hey ho. So obviously at the moment it is quite useful if you want to scale things without ladders, and it's great because your teammates can also use these. However, they are quite loud, like that. So obviously a lot of players enjoy spidering along the edge of the map. It's kind of a stealthy approach because players don't, it's not usually seen. But, and I'm going to fail horribly at this. Come on. There we go. So here I am, a little more sneaky. Bang! Bang! By the way, there's the enemy spider. Bang! That's frustrating. So what we need to do is make it... That really is loud. Jesus, that's obnoxious. So... Shut up! So what we need to do is make the vines better. So what we're going to try and do is maybe make it so the vines are silent. So when they are removed, they don't make sounds like this. If it's possible to do so, we haven't really. This is obviously just. Oh God, no! Ow! Okay, I'm dead. Obviously, these are just concept ideas of the class, and we have to pass on to our developers and see if they can make it work, can make it feasible. So that's one thing. But the other thing I keep finding myself is that if I'm using the web, yeah, great, my teammates can come up with me and we can climb this tower together. But the enemy is then going to be right below me and they're going to have the combat advantage and they're just going to be smacking me. And that sucks. I don't want them doing that. So what could we do instead? So maybe some additional counterplay to the webs would be that, sure, your teammates can use it, but if your enemies try to use it, they get weakness and slowness, and the duration would increase the longer they're on the web. So it's a bit of almost a safe spot for you. Again, it doesn't completely make it, you know, if they're below you and they're above you, but it could mean that if they're weaker, maybe if they're 10 seconds in the web, maybe even if they have a sharpness 5, they can't touch you. And that might be a better way to encourage the use of the web. So those are the two ideas I think would help Spider be a more appealing class. Silent webs and enemies get sort of debuffed if they come into your web, and also making the web throwing mechanic like this more effective by making it spread out, because again, look at this, even here I can just scout around, but even if I had only 5 of these, so there's almost one complete one there. If I back into creative mode, so from there, there's 1, 1, 1 here, that would be huge. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, another one up here maybe, because by the way we're going to maybe try and code it to throw, maybe another one up here. So already that is much more of a mess to try and get through. Sure, there's still ways around it, but it's going to be a lot more of a hassle. So those are the kind of changes I'd like to make to Spider if it's all possible. I think the Cobweb one will be doable. Web 1 will have to wait for our developers to let us know if I'm just talking out of my backside. But if anybody has any comments on those changes or any other ideas they'd like to see for Spider, now's the time.
Yeah, so one of those ideas was that Spider could have jump boost, though I'm not sure what paired with that would be useful for.
Interesting. I think we'd have to make that a toggleable on and off ability though, because I can imagine some players hating having jump boost permanently on. So that would be something we'd maybe have to look at. But yeah, sure.
There was also an idea where if you right-click the cobweb, everyone within 4 blocks of you couldn't move for like 3 seconds.
That's quite a powerful ability. Obviously you would have to measure that with a cooldown. For me, Spider is much more about a sort of an active throwing rather than there's a cast time for its active rather than instant. Obviously the main comparison here would be Immobilizer, where it's just as soon as you hit somebody, they're frozen. The only issue again with if it was just enemies, sure, there was a suggestion somewhere as well that you could almost sort of throw out a sort of a web of cobwebs. But my concern would be then teammates. But if you're just applying slowness, sure, that's maybe something we could look at.
Back to jump boost, I think the person who suggested it now is saying make it maybe like a smaller acrobat leap of 2 blocks high max.
Again, I don't want to. I'd have to maybe consider how that would affect acrobats' playability.
Yeah, that kind of moves. Spider's not currently a mobility class, is it?
I mean, you could argue it's a mobility class with its web. But it's
anti-mobility class.
The web definitely enables its vertical mobility. Just currently not very useful. Maybe that's something we could do with the web. Maybe we can make it that. And again, I don't know how possible this is, so don't take my word for this. But maybe we can make it that you climb slightly faster on the webs. I don't know how possible that is. I'm just going to throw that out as an idea. So, Doc, if you're watching the stream, don't panic. I'm not promising anything.
There was also, I have really no
User
idea if
joined
this
your
is even
channel.
possible, but an idea that spiders don't get stuck in their own cobwebs, like a Minecraft spider doesn't.
That we looked at. Oh God, speak of the devil, it's Doc. If
What are you guys doing?
we live stream, if we looked at, we have looked at that in the past, and if I recall, at the time, I believe that was at the time our development team said it would require a significant amount of development resources to make that happen. But that's something we could always really look at and see if there's a different way of enabling it. But I'm not convinced from the discussions I can recall at least that any of the methods would have changed. So it's something that we can maybe relook at, but I'm not so hopeful for. I think the amount of development time to do that would be better spent on improving the class and Annie overall in other ways. As much as a nice change it would be to have, it's just maybe technically a challenge. And is that really, would I rather a development team spend a week doing that or a week getting maybe competitive Annie back up and going? That's what we have to do.
There's a lot of comments about how that would make it a pretty good escape class, or how it could become a good escape class if you could somehow freeze people that are attacking you temporarily, or there's a comment here about making it so the web can be used in the Nexus and then despawns.
Abilities within the Nexus are kind of wonky because, sure, at the moment, like if I'm being chased on coastal here, I can sort of throw the cobwebs up and they land behind me, and not great placements here. But again, if we did it with the pyramid kind of scheme, there'd be a lot more potent, so that could be used as a sort of escape class. If we were looking at abilities within the World Guard region, we'd have to make it that it wouldn't be blocks being placed, it would be potion effects being applied, because obviously the potential for team grief there is extraordinary. And also the fact it kind of breaks one of the fundamentals that blocks cannot be placed within the World Guard region, full stop. But yeah, certainly something to consider.
There has not been any more comments since I asked you that one. There was an earlier one with Spider about maybe increased reach, but I don't, like, the rest of the comments were like, I don't think that's possible.
Reach is in terms of like combat reach? No. Wouldn't want to touch that, because that begins to stray into how do you communicate that to the player without making the player look cheaty, and oh god, no, that would be a nightmare. So no, definitely would stray away from that.
Can webs regenerate over time instead of one life set number? I feel like I saw you pick them up.
Yeah, they do.
Spider.
So you get 14 webs to throw. They stay on the ground for X seconds, and then they will despawn. So I must admit I don't have the numbers to hand, but there we go. So as you can see, they regenerate. So I don't have to throw them all at once. I can just throw one or two. Then I can throw maybe a few more. Then just one more. But then, they will, they have this, as soon as they hit the ground, that's obviously their countdown timer. So I'll get these two first, then a little bit of a delay, then those, and then that last one, like that. So that's already a feature of Spider.
So what type of class would you say Spider is currently? Is it a combat class? Is it a defense class?
Similar to, I would file it under the same as Tinkerer, which is technically a support class, but it's kind of like a support / enabling class. Like Tinkerer gives you speed and haste. Similar to Bard, it has that sort of almost like it's a utility class, I suppose is the best way to describe Spider at the moment. It does have some functionality, and I suppose you could call it a combat class with its ability to slow people and to sneak around, but I'd call it utility, and utility with a bit of mobility with respects to the climbing vines.
I wonder then if it'd have a better utility if let's say your webs didn't like despawn automatically. You either collected them or performed some action in game to call them back to you. But unless you did that, they were sort of like a permanent building as part of defense.
You can buy cobwebs for a certain amount of gold in the shop. Let me have a look here. Yep.
Okay.
So you can
Yep,
buy.
that covers that.
Yep. So,
But can you throw them?
you can't throw them, but they are persistent and permanent. And the other thing is, as well, with Spider, there is obviously a bit of counterplay that you can break the webs. So making them permanent structures, I'd be worried about, especially if you're being malicious with your placement, or just inaccurate. It's something to consider.
Okay. Time check. We're nearing an hour and a half. There are some other comments I don't see regarding the spider. I guess people are really jumping in on the ideas train, like when you right-click vines as well as letting you climb up a wall, give temporary jump boost and speed. Maybe there's talk about blood mage for some reason.
Well, I think
Cobwebs are expensive.
5 gold. I suppose they are, but they're as an item they're quite useful. They're quite potent. And again, I suppose the shop price was reflective at the time when we added them to make them more difficult for people to be able to team grief with them. But yeah, sure, we can maybe review the shop prices again. And just as a clarification, because somebody posted this in the forums the other day saying, "Oh, it sucks that chainmail is so expensive in the game." There is no chainmail in this shop. It is iron armor, and it's actually cheaper in gold terms compared to gold to buy yourself. So helmet would usually be 5 iron. It's only 3 gold. Come down to Murg's store. We've got a sale. Iron chestplate was 8 iron, now only 6 gold. It's that kind of use. But sure, we could look at a good old cobweb, or maybe just increase the quantity of it. So we can have a look.
Some off-topic suggestions. There was comments about adding more achievements. People love getting achievements, and I did mention in the chat where that came up that MindZ was looking at changing their achievement system, and that we'd probably then follow up with Gold Rush and Annihilation after that with new achievements and new ways to earn achievements.
Yes, so Doc is here, but just to quickly fill in for him, because I don't know if he's actually here.
Yeah, man. You want me to talk about it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the old system we currently have now is kind of limited to what we can and can't do. I'm working on designing something new I'm calling Milestones. What this is it's achievement based. I call them milestones because it's you hitting milestones in the system where achievements will have levels. So you unlock an achievement, you unlock level 1 of level 5. And at any point we can add more levels to make it have more rewards. And at the same time, it allows us to put it on all games on the network. And every single achievement can be game-based or network-based. So so want to do daily milestones where you log in once a day and you have 5 milestones you can unlock, like play 2 games, walk a certain distance, or loot so many chests in MindZ. And you do these milestones in a day and you get XP daily to be able to keep coming back once a day to doing stuff you want to do with milestones and unlocking stuff, and allow us to add in more features and more stuff with this whole new achievement system that I'm working on designing.
So there's a lot more. So it's global. So obviously it can be integrated with, like Doc said, with multiple modes and tracking, and it's less work for our development team to be able to one global plugin versus having to code it again from scratch for multiple game modes. So achievements for Annihilation is something we definitely want to do, is along with maybe other things, but that's part of a global update to the entirety of Shotbow rather than just Annie. But it is coming. Just stay tuned.
There was a question far earlier about how are you going to monitor and punish team grief, because recording doesn't work great for a majority of players.
That's a difficult one, and I think the main answer is unfortunately going to be you'll have to record and let us know. As I've said in the forums recently, I can be on a server patrolling. see a report come in of somebody team grief on the server, teleport to that, to the player reported within 2 or 3 seconds of them being reported for team grief, and all they're doing is breaking melons. And then they go rush mid, die, then log off. It's unfortunately team grief is such a quick, instant thing in the game, and often it can be very difficult, damn near impossible, for us admins to see it. So recording is usually the best way. I know that's not the answer to here, but hopefully we can encourage teamwork in other ways which might reduce team grief. But you're always, unfortunately, there will always be a subset of players out there who are a bit jerkish, and we will need to see evidence of them being those jerks, and then we can take appropriate action. Sorry.
Yeah, I figured that was about what it's going to be. There's a bunch of technical things we could do, but they are technically intensive.
Yeah. Annie's already quite intensive. We need as much processing power and for the game to run optimally.
Anyway, that seems to be all the questions I've gathered and all that have come in lately.
Wonderful. Right. I would just like to quickly round out with a couple of a quick discussion on some of the community classes that have been suggested recently in the Annie forums. There is quite a bit of discussion around Elytra and the implementation of those wings in Annie. And what I would encourage everybody to do is look at how a class can be balanced. So, apologies, I don't have the thread to hand, but one player was suggesting that Elytra wings would mean that you couldn't wear a chest plate. So that's a good way to begin balancing a class. Another class suggestion I saw was Predator. Feel free to go read up on the comment, the thread details. It's on the Annie forum, page 1 or 2. But unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of counterplay to it, and it seemed very powerful for the abilities being suggested. And again, to reiterate, even if it's an existing class, what we're interested in is adding new abilities, new strategies, and new mechanics to the game. There was a suggestion to give Spider the chance to use Spider Eyes, and you could inflict poison on enemies. However, that ability poison is already taken by Blood Mage, and I'm reluctant to add further classes that sort of encroach on each other. Obviously, we do have like Tinkerer and Bard sort of competing with the speed, although I would argue that those effects are applied in different ways. Bard is very much an area of effect, static, it's here, whilst Tinkerer can make multiple pads, place them all over the place, and can be a lot more mobile with them. So, something to consider. Obviously, Elytra and Vampire are sort of more Elytra wings, very mobile intensive, and we have a Vampire class sort of similar to how we envision sort of being able to fly, because that's the great thing with Annie. We love being able to put things in which makes players feel like, at the risk of sounding wrong here, but it's almost like you wouldn't be able to play this in vanilla PvP. These are almost sort of what, the hacked clients, these hacked clients can fly. We'll give you the ability to fly as Vampire. It's great, it's liberating, it's free. You want to be able to run super fast, like somebody using Timer. Sure, I'll give you Alchemist, I'll give you Speed 3. Go nuts, have fun. We like adding things which are fun. We can obviously balance them, but we want players to be able to have a bit more of a, I always see the suggestion for, Murg, you should do a civilian sandbox of Annihilation. How boring is that? Like, good grief, the PvP would be stale. If you want that kind of nonsense, go to Kit PvP servers. No, I'm joking, Doc, I'm joking. Obviously, MindZ has its other plethora of, other game-altering items, and I think that's what keeps Annihilation interesting. It's what keeps MindZ interesting, along with its other plethora of lore and puzzles and dungeons. But for Annie, it's all about enhancing that PvP experience with interesting abilities, powerful abilities, and then it's the non-envious task of trying to make everything fun, fair, and balanced. So thank you very much, Navarre, for helping me out with the stream today, posting the questions. Thanks to Doc for coming in and talking about the Milestone system. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. If this is getting a good reception, we'll maybe do some more sort of game mode live streams. I've got Nexus Natters. I'm sure Doc can come up with a much more snappier title for any Mind Z live streams he wants to do.
Mind Z matters.
Oh, I like that one, actually.
What? I don't like that at all.
Oh, well. But if people enjoy these kind of live streams, then please let us know on the forums or on the YouTubes or the Instagrams or wherever else we're streaming this. Navarre, you know. Because it is quite fun to talk through the thought process. We could have easily written this down in a forum thread, but I think this is a much better format. It allows you, you players to ask us questions and, clarity on how we think and try to balance the mode. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming. It's been great fun. Thanks to Navarre again and Doc, and see you all about.
And have a happy Easter.
Happy Easter.